This is the last standalone movie in the Iron Man series and the only Marvel movie to be pulled from theaters in China. It's also my favorite Marvel movie. Now, let's get back to the story. After the Battle of New York, Tony is deeply anxious. Not many people have had the experience of carrying a nuke to Thanos. So, Tony starts obsessively building suits to ease his anxiety. The story begins with Tony testing the Mark 42, which plays a significant role in the plot and is one of the most entertaining suits in Tony's arsenal. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the story. Tony is attending a New Year's Eve party with his ex-girlfriend Hanson when Killian, a huge fan of Tony, approaches him. Killian eagerly introduces himself and hopes to collaborate with Tony. Tony agrees to meet him on the rooftop in 5 minutes. But he's busy discussing Hanson's new research, the Extremis virus, which is a new type of virus that can cure various human diseases, accelerate healing, and enhance human abilities. Of course, it's still in development. There are significant flaws. Happy picked a leaf from a research plant, and it grew visibly fast. Tony didn't have time to delve deeper with his girlfriend before a loud explosion interrupted. This is where the virus's flaw lies. In the New Year's atmosphere, Tony forgot his promise to Killian, sowing future trouble. Back to now, the US faces frequent terrorist attacks with unexplained explosions, causing panic. The mastermind is Mandarin. To calm the public, the president replaced War Machine with Iron Patriot, but dissatisfaction remains. Rhodey talks to Tony, worried about his anxiety, hoping to help, but it pressures Tony more. Feeling unwell, Tony seeks Jarvis for a check, but Jarvis finds no physical issues, attributing it to psychological trauma. The scene shifts to Tony's company, where Pepper is CEO, handling all affairs. Because of this, Killian approaches Pepper. Hoping to work with Tony, Killian's image is now different, no longer shabby. He claims full recovery after 5 years of treatment. Through his introduction, Pepper learns he regained health using the Extremis virus. Killian demonstrates the virus's principle, enhancing human genes for extraordinary abilities. However, Pepper declines the project as it's more suited for military use. With no choice, Killian leaves, but Happy senses something off and decides to track them. Next, Happy follows them to a crowded square and discovers a transaction. He pretends to walk by, knocks the box open, and secretly takes one item. As he tries to leave, Sabin stops him. After brief pleasantries, both sides drop pretenses. Directly chose to boldly make a move. Happy did it right away, gave him a punch, but he not only was fine, but was quickly healing. This left Happy stunned. Before he could react, he was grabbed and thrown into the air. On the other side, after getting the box, he eagerly inhaled some gas, but it seemed to make him feel worse. His body glowed and then suddenly exploded. The energy from the explosion even flipped over passing cars. Happy was injured by the sudden explosion, but Sabin, who was fighting him, was not only unharmed but quickly healed and left the scene. Tony, upon learning of this, rushed to see Happy. After finding out Happy was attacked by terrorists, he decided to investigate immediately. But outside the hospital, a large number of media had gathered, ready to interview Tony. It wasn't until someone asked Tony when he could eliminate Mandarin that Tony gave a direct response. He told the media he wasn't afraid of Mandarin's attacks and even revealed his address, hoping Mandarin would come to him. Then he drove away. Back home, Tony immediately began investigating the recent explosions. With Jarvis's help, he recreated the scene of Happy's explosion and found clues from the dog tags left behind. Meanwhile, because Tony revealed his address, the media surrounded his house. Helicopters were broadcasting live, and his ex-girlfriend Hanson came to talk about the recent explosions. But at this time, Pepper and Tony were already in a heated argument because she felt they could be attacked at any moment and needed to move immediately. Tony insisted on staying. During their argument, Hanson noticed the live broadcast on TV and quickly warned them that a missile was incoming. However, the warning was already too late. Before they could prepare much, the missile hit them. Tony reacted quickly and immediately put the Mark 42 suit on Pepper to protect her from further harm, even though his own situation was very dangerous. Just as Tony recovered from the explosion, the roof was about to collapse. Luckily, Pepper in her armor shielded him from harm, but the attack wasn't over. Helicopters outside launched more missiles. Tony told Pepper to take Hanson and escape first, while he figured out a way to handle it. Once they were out, Tony called back Mark 42. Finally, Tony donned the Mark 42, and it was his turn to attack. He planned to use missiles to take down the enemy, but the weapon system wasn't ready. Thinking quickly, He used a piano as a projectile, taking out one helicopter. Then he pulled out a missile and threw it at the enemy, using his palm repulsor to take down another. The last helicopter launched a defensive assault, and the intense bombing made it impossible for Tony to operate. Meanwhile, the building suffered more severe collapses, and Tony ended up falling into the water. Pepper, disregarding the danger, ran to the cliff's edge. Seeing the scene before her, she knew Tony's fate was uncertain. But she couldn't help. Fortunately, Tony was unharmed under the armor's protection, just pinned by the fallen debris and unable to get up. At this moment, Jarvis extended a helping hand, rescuing Tony from the predicament. He grabbed Tony's hand and pulled him out of the rubble. By then, the suit's power had also recovered. Thus, Tony survived the attack. However, Tony instructed Jarvis not to set the destination to Tennessee. When he woke up again, Tony had already arrived in the cold Tennessee, and the suit's power was about to run out. Helplessly, Tony had to land in the icy wilderness. After a long flight, the power was so low that Jarvis couldn't function properly. So Tony opened the armor, braving the cold weather, and dragged Mark 42 through the snow to find help. He soon reached a small town and used a payphone to assure Pepper he was safe. Then he dragged Mark 42 to a warehouse to rest a bit before checking for useful items. Not long after, a boy with a toy gun came in. During their conversation, Tony learned the boy's name was Harley. Seeing Tony's armor, Harley put down his toy. Harley informed Tony that the news had recorded his attack and that his situation seemed dire. But Tony couldn't worry about that now. He took out a small item to trade with Harley, hoping to get some materials and a sandwich. The deal was clearly successful. Meanwhile, Pepper was worried about Tony. She noticed a light flashing on the helmet. After putting it on, she received Tony's gift, finally feeling relieved. In the car, Hansen revealed his true reason for seeking Tony. He suspected his boss was working for Mandarin, who was the same person that had approached Pepper for collaboration, Killian. The scene returned to Tony, who was walking with Harley on the street. Tony intended to ask about the local explosion, but Harley kept asking about the New York battle details, nearly driving Tony crazy. Fortunately, Tony managed to get useful information about the victim's family. The next moment, he appeared before the family and successfully obtained the victim's data. However, Mandarin's men had already found him. Then, effortlessly, they took out 2 police officers. Tony had no choice but to go into escape mode. Just outside the bar, he saw Sabin and had to change direction. Thanks to Harley, Sabin missed Tony. Tony crashed through a window into a store, dodging another attack from the female assassin. While Tony was nervously observing the assassin's position, she suddenly attacked him directly. Tony took a beating but found a chance to choke the assassin, using her neck to pull away from his own. The female assassin's body heat melted the gloves. She then kicked over a barrel of oil, delaying the attack. Taking this chance, she turned on the microwave and let the gas leak. When the time was right, Tony turned and ran. The metal in the microwave sparked, igniting the gas and flipping the entire guide several steps. Tony turned and saw Sivan under the melting sleeping bag. A torrent of water poured down like a beast. When the flood receded, Tony found Harry captured by Sabin, and he was pinned down, unable to escape. Tony signaled to Harry with his eyes, and Harry understood, revealing the item Tony gave him, blinding Sabin's 24K titanium eyes. Freed from Sabin's control, Tony used a portable palm cannon to drive Sabin back and took his car keys. To avoid trouble for Harry, Tony drove off in Sabin's car. Meanwhile, on Air Force One, the president's meeting was interrupted. Mandarin hijacked the plane's signal, capturing an oil executive on TV, demanding the president connect his call or the executive would die. Reluctantly, the president complied, but couldn't save the executive. This act was a direct provocation to the president. He ordered Rhodey to pilot the Iron Patriot and search every inch for Mandarin. Meanwhile, Tony reviewed his info and found clues. He called Rhodey, but Rhodey was busy following orders to find Mandarin, and the situation became awkward. Then Tony found a live broadcast van and used the equipment inside to connect to the satellite. At that moment, the staff discovered him, and coincidentally, he was a huge fan of Tony. He never dreamed Tony would appear here. Even his hairstyle was like Tony's. With the fans' help, Tony successfully connected to the satellite and searched AIM's content, discovering they were extensively using the Extremis virus for experiments. Those who underwent the experiments quickly recovered, but some unlucky ones died on the spot. After learning this information, Tony prepared to set off to find footage. Meanwhile, Pepper and Hansen were hiding in a 5-star hotel, but the next second, Killian barged in and took them all away. At this time, Rhodey was still on a mission. He found a hideout based on intelligence, but upon breaking in, he found only unarmed enemies. So, Rhodey lowered his guard and gentlemanly escorted them out. At this moment, he was still immersed in the superhero atmosphere, but the next second, he was ambushed. Just like that, Rhodey and his armor were taken over. Meanwhile, Tony was on a call with Harley, who handed the phone to Mark 42. Jarvis informed Tony that Mark 42 wasn't ready for testing. Upon hearing this, Tony made another deal on the spot. Fortunately, Harley reminded him that besides being Iron Man, he was also a genius inventor, giving Tony a new direction. The next second, he appeared in a store, buying a lot of materials. With just his hands, he turned these materials into a destructive engine. After preparing the suit, he finally infiltrated Mandarin's lair. He climbed over the wall, sneaked up behind a guard, tripped him with a rope, shot another, and quickly took down a third with a smooth move. Then Tony pointed out a small ball, successfully attracting a guard's attention, and the ball exploded when the guard wasn't looking. Another guard realized it too late and was also taken down by Tony. Just like that, Tony successfully broke into Mandarin's house and took out the Raven. After disarming a guard, Tony seized a handgun. He found Mandarin and held him at gunpoint. Under Tony's questioning, he learned that Mandarin was actually a comedian hired by Killian, the real mastermind. Suddenly, Sabon ambushed Tony from behind, capturing him. Tony, Rhodey, Pepper, and Hansen were all caught by Killian. Tony was tied to a bed frame, and Killian told him Pepper was being subjected to the Extremis virus. Unable to bear it, Hansen threatened to kill herself to buy Tony time, but Killian had already used her and shot her dead. He then left to confront Tony. Facing Rhodey's armor, Killian used heat to force him out, leaving Rhodey defenseless against Killian's flames, forcing him to surrender. Meanwhile, Tony's hand signal indicated that Mark 42 was ready. Receiving the signal, Tony began to maneuver against the enemy. As the enemy was still tying ropes, Mark 42 arrived, and Tony used his palm repulsor to take out the enemy. Then, while he was in a standoff with the enemy, the tail section device arrived just in time to rescue Tony. At this moment, enemy reinforcements arrived, and Tony had to hold them off while waiting for the remaining parts. However, before all the parts arrived, Tony had already eliminated all the incoming enemies. Fortunately, Mark 42 eventually arrived. On the other side, Rhodey didn't give up and took down an enemy. Tony successfully contacted him, and they noticed the Iron Patriot flying away. They then broke into the mansion, cleared the room of enemies, and interrogated about the Iron Patriot's whereabouts. They learned that Sabon was piloting it to carry out a mission against the president. They immediately set off, trying to warn the president, but the person answering the call had been bribed by Killian, as he needed the Extremis cycle to send the disable. Thus, the big shot successfully boarded Air Force One to escort the president, but his real goal was to hijack the president. They learned that the Iron Patriot was still on the plane, Simon. On the other plane, Sawin finally stopped hiding. She gathered the security personnel for a photo in the cabin, then rushed to the conference room to find the president, but couldn't find him for now. So she first cleared out the agents on the plane. At this time, the president was hiding under a table, but Sawin found him. She had him put on the Iron Patriot and, following the set program, fly to the port while she prepared to parachute to escape. At this moment, Tony arrived. He rushed in and directly confronted Sawin with a gun. He demanded the president's whereabouts, so Sawin used high temperatures to counterattack and detonated pre-planted bombs. The plane immediately lost cover, and the crew on board were also sucked into the chaos. To save them, Tony decided to reach Sawin in time and used a laser cannon in his chest to take her down. Then Tony flew out of the cabin to start rescuing people. He powered the crew's arms so they wouldn't let go. Tony successfully caught everyone and dropped them into the water. Just as Tony was about to return, a big truck drove by and knocked the armor out of civilian sight. Fortunately, Tony was controlling the armor from North City, which made him realize that Mark 42 was unreliable, so he activated all the intact armors at home to rush to the scene for support. Soon, Tony and Rhodey arrived at the port, where they found the Iron Patriot hanging, with the president inside. Tony and Rhodey split up. Tony went to deal with Killian, while Rhodey went to rescue the president. They acted immediately, and Killian noticed them, sending his men to intercept. Without armor, the two were powerless against the enemies using the Extremis virus. But just then, distant lights appeared. Tony's Iron Army finally arrived. And so, Pony and Road officially sounded the counterattack. The horn. Pony issued the counterattack order to the Iron Army, and various types of armor began executing the plan. At this moment, Road also requested a suit of armor from Tony, but Tony said all the armors were custom-made, leaving Road stunned. However, Tony still dispatched a suit to help Road escape. Dangerous situation. The armor's teamwork let Tony quickly gain the upper hand, but then Tony saw Pepper. To save her, Tony assisted his persuasion. Just as Tony was about to succeed, Killian emerged from below, damaging the armor's core. Tony seized the chance to reveal a clever attack, but the broken hand destroyed the platform, causing Pepper to fall. Seeing the danger, Tony quickly deployed another suit but was interrupted by the enemy. Meanwhile, Rhodes had found the president. He reassured the president while leaping down a cable. At this moment, two enemies appeared in front of Rhodes, blocking him. He used a handgun to counterattack, but it was almost ineffective. Instead, he was knocked off the container. Fortunately, Rhodes quickly broke the cable connecting the container. The two enemies couldn't dodge in time and were directly taken out. Rhodes used the falling container to successfully latch onto the president, then used his palm, cannon and iron. Thus, the two successfully revived the explosion. As Rhodes landed, he drew his gun and swiftly removed another steel pipe from the president. And so, the president was saved. After donning his armor, Rhodey left the scene with the president. Now, only Tony was left, and he successfully found Pepper. Just as Pepper was about to be saved, she fell down. Tony was heartbroken, but he had to deal with Killian first. At this moment, Killian found Tony. They both ran towards each other. Killian was ready to punch Tony, but Tony slid away and successfully put on his armor. With the armor, Tony's strength increased significantly. They started a brawl on the bridge. Killian pushed Tony off, then jumped down himself to deliver a final blow. Luckily, Tony ejected in time to avoid the deadly punch and switched to another suit. To face Killian, he flew towards Killian and knocked him into the sky. Then they faced off again. Tony prepared to attack with his repulsor, but Killian was clearly more agile, quickly dodging and launching a close-range attack. Tony grabbed another suit. Seeing Tony falling behind, suddenly a familiar sound came from afar. Looking over, it was Mark 42 coming to the rescue. So Tony prepared to get up, and this incompetence made Killian laugh. Tony could only make a sarcastic remark about this example, but Killian wouldn't give him much time to talk. Seeing the situation was critical, Tony directly transferred Mark 42 onto Killian. Then he ordered Jarvis to Mark 42, while he quickly ran away. Soon, Tony donned a suit of armor, but due to the explosion, it wasn't properly worn. Fortunately, he landed safely. Tony looked at the helmet in front of him, lost in thought, perhaps reminiscing about Pepper. But before he could think more, Killian emerged from the fire pit. It's undeniable, Killian was really foolish. Faced with this, Tony had no solution. Just when Tony thought he was done for, a stick flew in and knocked Killian away. Tony looked closely and realized it was Pepper. However, she was affected by the Extremis virus, gaining immense strength. At this moment, another suit of armor flew in, targeting Pepper. Tony hurried to stop it, but his earpiece was somehow disconnected. Luckily, Pepper dodged the attack. Then, seizing the opportunity, Pepper leapt up and punched the armor in midair, turning it into scrap metal. Such fierce combat power left Tony in awe. Then, he put on the armor's arm and punched Killian's henchman, Leech, defeating him. At the same time, he noticed a microbomb underfoot, kicked it away, and used his palm to set it off. Thus, the biggest threat in the film was finally neutralized. At this moment, Pepper snapped out of her rage, unable to believe she accomplished all this. Tony comforted her while carrying her away, and also gave her the most expensive fireworks show ever.